المجلة.
أسبوع جديد وعدد خاص من المجلة حول تيم بيرتون، أحد مخرجي الأفلام الأكثر شهرة بهوليوود. نتعرف بهالعدد على خيال تيم بيرتون الواسع من خلال رسوماته أيام الطفولة إلى نضوجه كصانع أفلام وتأثره بعدة أحداث. تيم بيرتون من أكثر مخرجي الأفلام إبداعاً وخيالاً بهوليوود. تتميز أفلامه بمزج الرعب بروح النكتة والرقة بعنصر الصدمة. حققت أفلام بيرتون على مدى السنوات المليارات من الدولارات، وأخرج 14 فيلم حطمت أرقام قياسية على شبابيك التذاكر العالمية. نستعرض بلمحة سريعة البعض من أفلامه.
From the imagination of Tim Burton comes The Nightmare Before Christmas.
And what did Santa bring you, honey?
The Pumpkin King!
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Wow!
Michael Keaton is Beetlejuice.
It's showtime.
This is amazing.
Batman. Forever. Going down.
Wants to play? We'll play!
Mars attacks. Why can't we all just get along?
My God.
Yikes.
يصف بيرتون نشأته بأنها كانت غريبة ومختلفة، حيث كان طفل منطوي بيحركه خياله الواسع. بيرتون مولع منذ الصغر بأفلام الرعب التي ظهر تأثيرها بشدة بأعماله فيما بعد، ومن الأشياء اللي أثرت فيه أيضاً مقربة منزله من المقابر، مما يفسر بروز موضوع الموت بشكل كبير بأفلامه.
The word normal always scared me because that indicated something that was quite subversively terrifying in some way. Again, growing up on monster movies where that was the dynamic in each and every one of those, where the monster was sort of the outcast of, and the people were much more of the sort of villainous element to it. That's always been important to me, and I can't seem to get rid of it.
إلى جانب موهبته بالإخراج، تميز تيم بيرتون بالرسم، النحت، الكتابة، التصوير الفوتوغرافي وابتكار الشخصيات الكرتونية. تكريماً لبيرتون خصص الميوزيوم أوف مودرن آرت نيويورك، أي متحف الفن المعاصر بنيويورك، معرض ضخم لسرد مسيرته والتعمق أكثر بشخصيته، وعرض لأول مرة مقتنيات خاصة فيه.
One of the things I love about what MoMA is doing is that it's not a categorization, and it's not just film stuff or drawing stuff. They've done a really good job of trying to blur those lines of what those things are. All these kind of things, whether photographs or little writings or sketches, for me are the most important part of any project. I mean, because once I'm doing it, like when I have to communicate with people, it's not easy for me. So the important work has to be done like in these little private projects. Well, going through all the artwork that I hadn't been through before, it really has re-energized me. There's something about that that kind of reconnects you to the world and who you are and what you've done and what you want to do. It's not till I look back that I kind of realize that I kind of obsessed with a certain thematic thing in a way. A lot of it, I think, has to do with your upbringing, your background, and how you felt as a child or as a young adult. And, you know, that sort of feeling of isolation and being alone, or, you know, and being inside your own head or your own mind has always been something that I felt very strongly. So that sort of connection with people that don't quite fit into society.
Tim has a very strong imagination. We wanted to trace his visual and narrative imagination from his earliest years, childhood if possible, through his adult work as a feature filmmaker. We contacted Tim and he agreed to the exhibition and he opened his archive to us, and we discovered that he had saved everything he's done since childhood. He sketches on cocktail napkins, he sketches on menus, desk blotters, and he saves everything too. And we were faced with approximately 10,000 pieces of work to choose from. It was more than we could have ever hoped for.
يضم المعرض 3 أقسام تتمحور حول مكان ولادة برتون وهي مدينة بيربانك بولاية كاليفورنيا. حمل أول قسم عنوان Surviving Burbank أي البقاء على قيد الحياة ببيربانك، حيث كان الرسم وصناعة الأفلام بباحة حديقة منزل والديه سبيل برتون للهروب من الضجر والوحدة.
He was very unhappy as a child in Burbank. He was bored and alienated. And so he looked towards horror films, comics, horror films and humor as outlets for his boredom. And I think the nervous energy he developed as a child is something that he continues to exhibit today.
Growing up in this monotonous suburb, Tim had to create internally what he couldn't find externally. So he actually found his signature style very early in his career, and although it changes from film to film, you'll see in his drawings a very specific aesthetic that is easily recognizable as Tim Burton-esque.
I drew from the very beginning, and then what seemed to happen is as you went through school, you know, teachers say, oh, you shouldn't draw like this, you should draw like that. So by time kids got about like 10 years old, they could think they couldn't draw. Even if somebody was telling me I couldn't draw, I still liked doing it.
أما القسم الثاني تحت عنوان Beautifying Burbank أي تجميل بيربانك. بعد تخرج برتون من كال آرتس أي معهد كاليفورنيا للفنون، حيث درس فن الأنيميشن أي فن التحريك، عام 1979 بدأ بالعمل مع والت ديزني برودكشنز. وبالرغم من وصف مكان ديزني بالأسعد على وجه الأرض، لم يكن هذا شعور برتون لسببين. السبب الأول تضارب ضوء الفن الداكن مع أسلوب ديزني، فعالم ديزني مليء بالشخصيات اللطيفة ذات التصاميم المحببة والقصص السعيدة، بينما عالم برتون يرتكز على رؤية مختلفة من خلال الرعب والشخصيات الكئيبة السوداوية. أما السبب الثاني نابع عن رغبته ببدء مشاريعه الخاصة، وفي تلك الفترة بدأ برتون بمجموعة من الرسومات والأشعار التي كانت النواة لفيلمه الشهير The Nightmare Before Christmas.
His time at Disney in the early 80s was a bit frustrating because none of his projects were realized. And he did all these cartoons when he was actually supposed to be working. And at any time when Tim feels pent up or frustrated or bored, Tim's only way of release is to create. So he created a series of cartoons just as a diversion. However, he never stopped trying. This section of the exhibition begins beyond Burbank, which is the Tim Burton that everyone knows and loves, Tim as a filmmaker.
القسم الثالث من المعرض تحت عنوان Beyond Burbank أي ما وراء بيربانك، وهو القسم اللي بيتناول انتقال برتون إلى صناعة الأفلام اللي شهرته. لذا كما تشاهدون الزي الذي أرتديه الآن يعود ل The Corpse Bride أحد أبرز شخصيات أفلام برتون. The Corpse Bride قصة حب بتجمع الحياة والموت، فيلم بطريقة ستوب موشن أنيميشن أي التوقيف بالتحريك، وهي تقنية استخدمها برتون على مر السنين.
You may kiss
news, daughter. There'll be a wedding after all.
خلال منتصف الثمانينات وبعد ما ترك مدينة بيربانك بدأ برتون بصناعة الأفلام أبرزها إدوارد سيزرهاندز، بيتل جوس، مارس أتاكس، Nightmare Before Christmas, The Corpse Bride, Batman Forever, Alice in Wonderland. كما برز تعاون برتون المتكرر مع الممثل جوني ديب والممثلة إلينا بونم كارتر صديقته الحالية والملحن داني ألفمان.
Tim has been very faithful and loyal to his collaborators, and in turn, his collaborators have been very faithful and loyal to him. Tim, of course, has worked with Johnny Depp since Edward Scissorhands, and he's working with Johnny Depp in Alice in Wonderland. And it's been said that they have a very personal language on set where they can only understand each other.
Alice, you're terribly late, you know. Naughty.
What I was really responded to in movies was German expressionism. There was just something about the dynamics and the shapes with the shadows and the light and dark and you know, like Fritz Lang and those kind of, you know, or George Méliès, you know, those old films that really captured a spirit and a feeling of like being in a dreamscape or inside of somebody's mind was something that was very strong to me. For something like Alice in Wonderland, I mean, it's not something that I necessarily kept like from as a child saying, I have to make Alice in Wonderland. Although it certainly follows with themes and images. It will have a lot of things in it that I would still use it on a completely personal project. I mean, a kind of fairy tale fable image, sort of symbolic imagery that say something like Scissorhands has for me, but something like Alice has it as well. It's just, you know, it's just a known entity. Same thing with Batman. I wasn't really a comic book hardcore fan. I just really like that world and that character and those characters in that. So, you know, just something that kind of hidden quality and kind of wanting to hide personality. Obviously something well known, but something felt personal to me. The tools of filmmaking have changed over the years, obviously. I mean, I try to keep the same approach where you try to keep it as hands-on and handmade and homemade as you can, because I just feel like that is something that I always, you know, I liked having actors and sets and having limitations that you have to deal with. That's what makes it fun. Now, with so much technology at your disposal, it can get a bit overwhelming, and it's almost like the reverse of what I've been used to. But, you know, knowing that you still try to keep it as human and as tactile and as you know, present as you can. But it's difficult with, you know, shooting in a vacuum. Oftentimes people aren't even shooting in the same shot with each other. And having been through it and being able to have the joy of feeling the texture of a set and seeing an actor dealing in that light and set, you know, it's something that stays with you. So I try to keep that spirit.
أليس إن وندرلاند آخر عمل لبرتون مقتبس عن رواية الكاتب لويس كارول الشهيرة. احتل الفيلم المرتبة الثانية بمرتبة الأفلام الأكثر ربحاً عام 2010 والمرتبة السادسة بقائمة الأفلام الأكثر ربحاً على الإطلاق، وتم اختيار برتون عام 2010 رئيس للجنة التحكيم بمهرجان كان السينمائي. بعد الفاصل منتابع المزيد عن تيم برتون، خليكن معنا.
المجلة.
أهلا بكم من جديد. منواصل عددنا الخاص حول المخرج تيم بيرتون. بمحاولة لفهم شخصية بيرتون لفت انتباه القيمين على المعرض تركيزه على مواضيع متكررة برسوماته واللي برزت أيضاً بأفلامه، بذكر منها العلاقة المعقدة بين الطفولة والبلوغ واستخدام بيرتون المفرط للخطوط.
When I was an animator at Disney, I was much weirder than I am now at that time. I found that when I wore striped socks, I felt more grounded. It's a very strange, circular dynamic because I was feeling very crazy or very floaty or whatever. And when I started wearing striped socks, I just felt calmer and more grounded.
You can see the same themes in the art in the gallery, on the walls in the gallery, as you'll see in this film. And those themes, as we identify them, are an interest in childhood and adulthood, the relationship between childhood and adulthood, armoring and masking, masks and costumes, capes, and that sort of thing. You'll see that in one part of the exhibition. And there's the theme of what we call creature-based notions of character, that he looks at human characters as creatures, tries to find the creature within inside all the characters in his films. And you see that in his art. A lot of the art in his films is a kind of transformative thing where they're part human, part creature. There's also his interest in the carnivalesque, which is a kind of festive interest in the grotesque. Mexican Day of the Dead has a festive interest in skeletons. You see that in Tim's work. You see pumpkins and stripes, severed heads, stitching. All his drawings for the characters in his films usually begin as either circular shapes or triangular shapes. The circular shapes suggest loss, and the triangular shapes suggest trouble. He says that all his drawings look alike, and they don't really. But what he means is when he begins to design a character for each new film project, he sketches them out on pads, and the sketches all seem to look alike. Looks like Edward Scissorhands, and looks like Vincent. There's a certain similarity.
In the beginning of the exhibition, we wanted to introduce visitors to the entirety of Tim Burton. So we have studies of his clowns, creatures, men, women, and couples. And of course, if you look at his clowns and his creatures, his men and his women, they sort of kind of intermingle. All of these clowns are actually one character called Ho-Hum. And they're variations on this one character who is quite frightening. And it may be a reflection of Tim's own fears, but it's also a reflection of how he views certain characters in his life.
He came to the museum about 6 months ago in July, and he looked at the gallery space, looked at the art we'd selected, and said, I would like to create 7 new pieces for the exhibition, 7 installation pieces based on art that you've selected for the show. So in the show, you'll see the deer topiaries from Edward Scissorhands, one of the things that Johnny Depp's character sculpted, a giant balloon boy in the main lobby. You see there's 3 creature sculptures that he created for us. There is a fluorescent carousel. We have a black light room, and he created this fluorescent carousel. There's a robot boy sculpture whose head opens and closes. You'll see a Stain Boy diorama, a little house that you look inside and see a crime scene.
The Stain Boy diorama, which is Christmas time at Stain Boy's house, and it is also the scene of a crime. The Stain Boy, who was created as a reaction to his failed Superman Lives project that he was developing. So in turn, he created a character called Stain Boy, whose only power it is to leave stains. And his very prominent S on his chest is very much, we believe, a reaction to another superhero character that we all know who we're referring to.
البعض يرى بفن وأفلام وشخصية تيم بيرتون الروح المظلمة والقاتمة وسوداوية الرؤية، في حين يرى البعض الآخر الجانب المشرق والمرح وروح الفكاهة، وينسب بيرتون إلى فئة البوب آرت أي الفن الشعبي، وهي حركة فنية ظهرت بالخمسينات تحدت الفن التقليدي عن طريق جعل الفن أقرب من الثقافة الشعبية.
started the exhibition, I thought of Tim, as many people do, as kind of a Gothic person. I kept thinking of the Gothic, the dark films. I thought of Ed Wood, Nightmare Before Christmas, and Corpse Bride. But the closer I looked, I realized that it was also this pop side of him, this bright, colorful side, the Mars Attacks, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory side of him. So we were very pleased to kind of balance people's view of Tim based on the art that he has done. As you go through the exhibition, you'll see art that really is pop art, much more like pop art than Gothic art. I thought of him first as being a dark artist. Now I think he's basically optimistic. All his films have an optimism about them. Even a tragedy like Sweeney Todd ends on a kind of epiphany. And all his films, basically, all the heroes of his films are basically artists. They're people who create. Edward Scissorhands is a sculptor. Ed Wood makes bad movies. You know, they're bad, but he continues to create no matter what happens.
Ah, that was perfect.
Perfect. Do you know anything about film production?
Well, I like to think so.
Tim has a very macabre sense of humor, of course, but his humor kind of tempers the horror in his works. And the horror, at the same time, kind of elevates the humor. So they play against each other. There's a lot of dichotomy in Tim's works, his childhood, adulthood, the balance of childhood and adulthood in his works, where he believes children understands and finds things to be less scary than adults do.
I'm always amazed at how certain images freak out adults when in fact it was something that was very much a part of probably their childhood and every other. And that's what fairy tales, I always felt, did for me, is that they're quite frightening, abstract stories, and children relate to them because it represents the abstract of life and how you know, how am I going to deal with something I don't really understand, and, you know, all these weird, horrible images that are, I think, crucial to childhood, and yet I think people kind of forget, some people forget as they get older.
ما في شك أنه فن وأفلام تيم بيرتون تتميز بمزيج من الغرابة والطرافة ومقدرته إلى جذب الأجيال المختلفة على حد سواء. ولكن رغم عالميته مازال بيشعر بيرتون بعدم فهم العالم لأسلوبه، وهو اللي قال I've always been misrepresented. I could dress in a clown costume and laugh with the happy people but they'd still say I'm a dark personality. أنا بانتظار تعليقاتكم على صفحة المجلة شو على الفيسبوك، وبإمكانكم أيضاً مراسلتي على إيميل البرنامج المجلة@الحرة.com. بنهاية الحلقة بشكر فريق العمل باستديوهات الحرة واشنطن دي سي، وبالأخص بيير جاد. أنا بلاقيكم الأسبوع القادم وأكيد رح تكونوا على الموعد.
المجلة.